Okay. So today we're talking about orphan spirits, and not necessarily orphan spirits themselves, but more the mindset that's created by existing in that state. Um, you know, just to be clear, like I'm gonna pause here a moment and talk about something because, like, I know that there are people who will watch this message and they will get triggered. When I start talking about some of the stuff on it, it will happen, and that's fine. There are some of you who will hear some of the things said and you'll like feel accused. Do not give in to offense, because that is the first lie that comes with this. And also, forgive the shaky camera and the background. We're in the camper, it's still under construction, and the camera's on the stand more than it usually is in the camper. So anytime I like even shake my head a little bit, it wobbles a bit. Anyway, and the thing about it is that I'm going to do my best here, because like there is a thing here that when these kinds of touchy subjects are brought up, there is a place for us to be able, or rather for us to take time to lean on God in how to address, how to speak on the matter. You know, one thing that I learned a long time ago is that how we present a message, how we present a word of knowledge, that's on us. Like, unless God gives us specific instructions, it's on us how we present it. If we come at it aggressively and brutally, you know, if we're gonna give this word of knowledge and we're gonna bring the hammer and the sword every single time, that's because we choose to. And there are times when that's not what's called for. And the reality is that there are times where what we should be doing is going to God for those instructions to be able to minister appropriately, because the reality is that sometimes whether somebody could receive a word or not is not dependent on the word itself, it's dependent on how it was presented. And too often, we in the church, we get caught in this headspace of, well, I'm going to present the truth, and, you know, they just take it or leave it. And, you know, it's basically like you're punching somebody in the face with a fact, when in reality, you could have just handed it to them. You could have just handed it to them, and that would have been enough. So, if I pause at times, it's because I'm just trying to get some guidance for how to continue forward. Because the reality is like myself, I know how much this has like triggered me, because God has had us on a little journey here talking about orphanhood and orphan spirits and the mindset that comes with being an orphan in spirit. And I am seeing some things about myself, and it has been very triggering at times and very offensive at times. But the thing about it was that the offense was very much so mine. God said something and I got offended and couldn't listen any further, and when I was able to finally calm down, the revelation was, yeah, it was fine. What was said was fine. Because one thing that Heather had even just brought up to me from a message she was watching is that one of the big things that happens with people who have been orphans, who have had orphan spirits, is you learn to be on your guard from being a joke. You learn to be on your guard from being fooled. Because the world will make a mockery of you. There you are, already feeling alone, and suddenly the people around you, or, you know, whether it's peers, parents, different people, they might come along and they might absolutely mock you and slander you and make you feel so much more alone. There's one verse that I want to start off with here. It's just to kind of establish a baseline for what we're talking about and who understands this. And that's Mark 6. Starting in verse 1. Jesus left there and went to his hometown, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. "Where did this man get these things?" they asked. "What's this wisdom that has been given him? What are these remarkable miracles he is performing? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own home." He could not do any miracles there except lay his hands on a few sick people and heal them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. The thing of it is that in that moment, at that point in time, Jesus felt something that a lot of us have felt. And that is scorned by those who are supposed to love us. And I know there's plenty more, and you can look at a lot of different examples, but I always feel, and maybe that's just because of my own past and my own experiences, but I always have felt, ever since I read that the first time, that is the most relatable moment. That no matter how far Jesus had come, I mean, you look at the progression of what they're saying. Who taught this man these things? Who gave him the ability to do these remarkable miracles? It starts off just amazed at what he's become. And then it turns into, isn't he this? Isn't he just the carpenter? Aren't his sisters over there? And then they're offended.
Envy.
We'll get there. We'll get to envy. It is the way that so many people have endured this. To start off with, just to highlight something, it's been a little bit since we've had a message where we talked about orphan spirits and being an orphan. It's been almost a year. So just to kind of explain that out a little bit, to remove any, false narratives or any Christianese, having an orphan spirit comes from having a spirit of abandonment. There are demons who specifically focus on making people feel abandoned and rejected. We talked about it during the Deliverance series, where we talked about the ones that weigh us down. These are the demons who try to drag us down and hold us in these places. But the reality is that it's not always demons. Okay? Sometimes you can have an orphan spirit, and that spirit will carry on with you. And the verbiage is really broad. So again, we're just removing the Christianese here. Sometimes it is a demon of abandonment, rejection, or what have you, that sticks to you, clings to you. And as it sits there, it feeds you these lies that perpetuate this mindset. But it's not always the demon on you. Sometimes it's the demon on your parents or your family or your friends. And they perpetuate those lies to you directly because it's coming through them. And that demon will whisper, sure, but it's not on you. It's on them. And it'll use them and puppet them and play with them and have them perpetuate everything that it wants you to believe. And the thing about it is that the orphan spirit at that point in time is a mindset that you carry because you have been taught to believe a series of lies that have been pushed with that have been reinforced with evidence that you have experienced. Everyone always rejects me. You know how I know? Because everyone's ever has done it. My mom, my dad, my siblings, my cousins, my friends, everybody at some point has walked away. There have been times where I have begged God to talk to me, and he has been completely absent, and I have been left alone to just sit in those feelings and in that pain of being completely alone, that not even the God of heaven and earth will show up because I'm not good enough. Does that feel familiar? To think that way, to feel that way. To feel left alone in darkness. To break it down, you may have been rejected by your family. You may have been rejected by your friends. You may have been rejected by people who came along over and over again. Maybe you have a long history. Maybe you have bad parents. I can relate to some parts of that. Like, my dad is a good guy, but, you know, one of my earliest memories is him rejecting me, abandoning me to live with my mom, who I begged him not to let me live with. And that's the memory. One of my earliest memories of my mom is her dragging me into a room to be by myself. You know, the cry it out method's a thing. I know that there are a lot of parents who use it. I know that psychologists perpetuate it as being a good thing. Everything that I've heard from God says otherwise. You know, and that's, if you want to argue the differences, that's fine. That's going to be a fight between you and God, because you're going to have to go to him to talk about his revelations on that. But the reality is, it puts a child in a state of abandonment, because the one thing that they have, their crying, their voice, suddenly means nothing. And my mom actively did this way into my older ages. Yeah, I was 3 years old, and she was still throwing me into a room to cry things out if I upset her or threw a temper tantrum or anything. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just tossed me in there. And I remember this. This isn't some sour grape statement based off of how I felt about things. No, I distinctly remember being drugged and thrown into that room and having the door shut and locked on me and my being left in there. I remember it so well because there was a demon who would show up and talk to me. I remember the voice. I hated it. I hated being in that room. I hated everything about it. And I knew it enforced this idea that she didn't love me. So I grew up around with this perpetual belief that no one loved me. No one cared about me. Nobody wanted me. I'd been thrown away by my mom, and I'd been given away by my dad.
Wow.
And then we moved all the time, so I couldn't even make friends.
Oh.
So I had nobody. I had my one brother, and we were usually fighting with each other. So we were alone. And that, in and of itself, informed most of my thoughts and perspectives for my entire life. And the thing about it is that this story, my testimony, as it were, is not unique. Maybe facets of it are, but the reality is that there's plenty of us who have had parents who have made them feel alone, made them feel rejected, made them feel abandoned. You sit there and you just wonder what's wrong with you, because the thing about it is that when you're little, you're black and white. There's no gray area. You don't have the cognizance for it.
Yeah.
To be real about it, biologically, your brain doesn't function that way yet. You're not capable of completely abstract thought.
Right.
I mean, object permanence isn't something that develops until what, like 2-3 years old?
Yeah.
So the idea, so once something leaves, it's gone forever until a certain point in time where your brain develops to say, oh yeah, that actually isn't that way that works. And that's the problem, is that so many of us, we get hit with this orphan stuff when we're little, when our brains can't reason it out. We can't say, you know, Dad rejected me because of how Mom made him feel.
Yeah.
And she tore his heart out and ripped him to pieces and made him feel worthless. And then in the process of divorcing him, and then to the point that he went home, he left us and went home to Wisconsin and was just a broken man until God put him back together.
Yeah.
You don't have that. All you have is the feeling of, my dad is giving me away despite me begging him not to.
Yeah.
The one person who I thought loved me is giving me to somebody who I know doesn't love me.
Oh.
And then from there, the only thing you can think is, somebody's wrong. It's me.
Somebody had to have done something bad.
Somebody had to have done something bad. And Mom says she didn't, and Dad says he didn't, so it must have been me. Because that's the way that kids think.
Yeah.
Everything has to have a fault. Everything has to have a cause. There are a lot of adults who think the same way. I mean, just be real about this for a moment. Pause and think about it. How many times do things go wrong in life and you assume that there's a fault to be had? Even the disciples, when Jesus had that man come up who had been blind from birth, they asked Jesus, who sinned in his family? As though his blindness was caused by somebody sinning in his family, and the curse came down upon him. Jesus told them, nobody, that's not how this happened. This was for God's glory. Now he's healed. But that's how we think. And the funny thing about it is you can see it. You can see it on the disciples. The disciples are a funny character study, because you watch them and how they acted, and you can see orphanhood just shrieking from their insides.
Yeah.
John, the one who Jesus loved, half the time he refers to himself in his own gospel, he refers to himself simply as the one who Jesus loved.
Yeah.
Why is that? Do you think it's just because he had a massive revelation about what that was to be loved? It's because he needed it.
Yeah.
Simon, or Peter, I suppose. Peter rejected Christ. He fought. He was so willing to defend him. But he was constantly struggling with the love that Jesus poured out. When Jesus tried to wash his feet, he couldn't receive that. He couldn't receive it because he wasn't good enough. He wasn't good enough to have his feet washed by Jesus. So he told him no. And then when Jesus said, okay, but you have to have this happen, And then he's like, okay, then do it all. Then do it all. Everything. That's common stuff. Judas Iscariot betrayed Jesus for money. For money. He betrayed Jesus. Think about that for a moment. Think about, like, where does it come from? Like, everyone just assumes that Judas was just this evil little demon guy who was, like, looming in the background, waiting for his time to strike. When Jesus talks about the 72 being sent out, and when he talks about the 12 being sent out, they come back all of them are talking about how they cast out demons in his name. That means that Judas Iscariot was running around casting demons out and speaking the gospel. Judas Iscariot, they say that he was marked out from destruction from the beginning. I've questioned that for years. I won't delve into that, but I've questioned that remark, that specific thought process written by the disciples who wrote those gospels. I know that their culture was toxic. I know that they were constantly trying to prove themselves. I know that they were constantly trying to do this because they talk about it. They go stand before Jesus and they say, okay, Jesus, who is the greatest among us? They were, before they even did that, they were bickering about who was better. There was a culture that the disciples had. And it probably looks a lot more like the modern church than most of us like to consider.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that most of the modern church is run by orphans.
Yeah. Sadly, yes.
So when I talk about this stuff, when I'm talking about, like, my family and different things like that, when I go on to talk about friends and different situations and the way that we think, you know, it's because it's there. I'm not saying this because it's not there. I'm saying this because it's stuff. This isn't like a specific message for a select group of people. This is broad. Because unfortunately, this problem is broad.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is sometimes it's not sometimes your family does it. Sometimes it's your peers, your church, your school, your friends. Sometimes you get bad friends. Sometimes you end up with groups of friends who are amused by you more than they love you. They take you in and they adopt you, and you feel adopted. You feel, because at the end of the day, you're a kid and all you want is to be accepted. It's all you yearn for. It's what we're meant to be. We're meant to live in a constant state of acceptance. This is something that Jesus says in John 17 when he prays for us to understand the way that we're supposed to just be connected to God and himself. And in that connection, we're supposed to live and be whole. He prays for us to understand that. Because when we're born separate, and because of sin, we're divided from our King. We're divided from our wholeness. And the thing about it is that we struggle. We struggle. And as a result, we yearn for acceptance. And as children, we don't have the ability to recognize, like, these are bad friends. All we know is that they're friends. They care about me. They've accepted me. So that must mean they're okay. But then they start asking you to do things, or they start telling you to do things, or they start demanding that you behave like them, and maybe that feels wrong, but you do it anyways because you feel like you have to. But then the moment that you put your foot down, the moment that you say no or say that you're uncomfortable, they mock you. If you're lucky, they mock you. If you're not lucky, they hurt you, reject you, abandon you. And suddenly you're being taught a lesson again. that you're alone, and then no one wants you. See, the accumulation of these messages that are taught to us, and this is the same, like, friends are one thing, church is another thing, school is another thing. I've had churches that I've gone to where as long as you were doing everything that they wanted, as long as you were matching with them, they loved you and would accept you. And I've had a few churches who never accepted me and always hated me. And that was a thing. It was a thing. I worked for one. I know I've talked about this in previous messages, but it's been years, so hopefully people have forgotten that I called them out by name. But I had one church where, you know, they literally called me out from the pulpit for not matching their vision.
Wow.
You know, like, they didn't call me by name, they called me out by where I lived. I was driving there from Troutdale, and the lead pastor got up and, like, mocked the idea that I was coming from Troutdale because he believed that I should be coming from a church, I should be going to a church in my area, even though God had told me distinctly to be going to this church. But he had no metric for that. So he just got up, he didn't understand it, he never talked to me, of course. So he just got up there and passed judgment on me from the pulpit. And he did it multiple times. Multiple times. Never talked to me. Actively avoided talking to me. Literally, if I walked up to try to talk to him, he'd bolt. The thing about it is that, like, there are so many different forms of abuse that we can endure. There's emotional abuse, there's spiritual abuse, there's physical abuse. There's 7, technically. I just don't remember them all. But the thing of it is that so many of us as orphans, we carry them all. It's like a bingo card and we're all winners, but not. And it sucks. And the thing about it is that where that takes us is that where we are informed, where we're taught these different lessons, these are lies. These are lies from the enemy that we are taught. And yes, they manifested through people. Like I said, though, sometimes those demons are not acting through you. Sometimes they're acting through other people in order to corner you and put you into a place. Not every demonic attack is a demon attacking your spirit, attacking your soul. Sometimes demonic attacks are them using the people around you to create a mindset that you're going to carry for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Because you want to know what the best thing is. Demons understand that they have a limited number. Okay? We don't always think about that. We don't always understand that. It says 1/3 of the heavens fell when the red dragon swept its tail across the stars. 1/3. That means that there are 2 angels for every demon. But there is a number. It wasn't 1/3 of infinite, it was 1/3 of something, some number. So they know how many they have. Which means, with numbers being a issue, they know, and this is something that I was taught, they know that the best way to make things happen with people, with us, is to brainwash us, to create mindsets, to create thought patterns that we will carry for the rest of our lives, and that will inform our ability to receive or not receive from God.
Yeah.
And as a result, then they don't have to sit there and, like, sit on us. They don't have to, like, loom around us. They don't have to connect to us. They don't have to play the familiar spirit role. They can go somewhere else and do some other work and just leave us to, like a wind-up toy walking towards the edge of the table.
Yeah.
And that's how they do it, because oftentimes that saves them from having to push, and maybe they'll have to pop back in and, like, nurture the seeds, as it were, to make sure that they're growing nice and tangled. But the reality is that they don't have to sit there and be with us all the time. Because again, demons are persons. They have an individual body, an individual person that they exist as. So they can't be everywhere all at once. They're not omnipresent. But that's the thing, is like we sit in these places. And I know that there are some of you who like would listen to this and you're just like, well, that's an awful lot of talk about demons. Sometimes it's just the people. Yeah. Sometimes what you have are situations where you have people with mindsets that already exist. Maybe your parents have already had those mindsets developed, and then they're perpetuating those mindsets down to their children. Sometimes it's all the wind-up toys winding up the other toys. That's true. It would be wrong of me to like sit here and tell you it's always demons. Sometimes the demons attacked your parents, and then they let your parents run, and your parents are there, and they teach you, and so they teach you this false doctrine, this false ideas, all these lies.
Out of their own brokenness.
Yeah, exactly, out of their own brokenness. I actually remember a particular man, a pastor that I knew, and he had been a gang member, and he had, even though like he had this incredible story of like God reaching him and touching him and showing him that he was real, and he had this incredible testimony of Jesus Christ, he also still struggled because he wasn't completely free of the mindsets that he had been taught when he was a gang member. And I remember distinctly having to talk with him because he was teaching his kids gang mentality things, and it's like, that's not. I remember just having to look at him and be like, is that from the kingdom of heaven? Because I feel like that's in no way like from the kingdom of heaven. And he's just like, no, but that's how it works, right? The getters get. The person who shows up first gets the good stuff.
Wow.
Not necessarily, man. Not in a kingdom where the first will be last and the last will be first. That's not how that works. But that's the thing. The mindsets matter. And the struggle with it is that we have to be open to having a complete renewal of our minds. And we're not always even available to think about it. Like we're not cognizant of the need because it's been there since you were a little kid. So there's a place where God wants to show you the reality of who he is, and he can't because you don't even begin to see it. Like you're just like, you blow past it, or you assume that it's not true. If I tell you that God wants to like come underneath you and carry you, if he wants to be your way, your path, your direction, you're going to ask, okay, what do I do? Nothing. You do nothing. You actually do nothing, because what it is he's going to carry you. It's not on you to pick up your things and move them. It's on him to pick up your things and move them, because that's what he's saying he wants to do. In Orphans, we have these mindsets because everything is on us. We've spent our entire lives alone. We've had nobody to trust, nobody to believe in, nobody to hold us. We exist in the absence of love, in the absence of nurturing, in the absence of care. Maybe we've had people who came along and taught us a little bit, and it was enough for us to survive, but it wasn't enough for us to be completely functional. In Germany during the Holocaust, the Germans did terrible experiments. But one of them was that they took a town. They took an entire town of people, and they regimented their food and water in order to determine the lowest possible amount of food that a human body could function on.
Wow.
The person who wrote about it visited and described it as being like being in a town full of skeletons.
Wow.
The people in this town, they could still walk around, they could still move around, they were still functional, but they had no energy, they had no drive, They were hopeless, they were hungry, they were starving, but they had just enough to go for to continue living. That's not an image of the kingdom of God.
It's famine.
Yes, it's famine. And that's where the enemy would have us stay,
Yeah.
is in this emotional famine
Yeah.
where we stay as orphans. So yeah, like this thing where we sit in these places, we don't think about trusting. And what's more is, like, because we can't trust, everything's on us. We have to cope. So many of us have, like, our own coping mechanisms. And we've talked about this long ago in the past, many, many times. We've talked about coping mechanisms. But orphans have coping mechanisms. It's like when a baby sucks their thumb. That's an effort to reassure themselves. It's self-soothing. When they suck their thumb or like pop their ear, or they have a safety blanket. That's them soothing themselves in order to satisfy that thing in them that needs to feel comfort and love. They learn to do it themselves because they've been left alone. And that doesn't change. We get older and we find new methods. One of the biggest ones is achievement. This is one that I struggle with more than anything else. We get focused on moving forward. I see it all the time, especially on social media. It's fantastic. You can hop up on there and you can see so many people just talking about, like, what they got, how far they've made it, how far they've come. I was living in a car a couple years ago, and now I just bought my first house, and yada yada yada. And it's like, that's good for you, but also the reason why you're toting it in front of everybody is to prove the people wrong, especially if they have some message about, like, screw these haters or whatever. It's all done out of spite. It's all coming from that orphan place, because orphans function in, when they go to achieve to prove something. They compete. Yeah. They're competing. The funny thing about it is that they're competing with their own lack of feeling like they mean something. At the end of the day, the reasons why they push so hard and are willing to go so far and even, like, behave in ways that are completely immoral, and they'll justify it, because they have to. But we'll do things. We'll gaslight people. We'll trash on people. We'll dumpster people. We'll angle for those little emotional advantages. I don't want to like express and say, like, we're the worst kinds of people or anything, but we do bad things. And we justify it because we need to. Because we need to have this. More than we need to know that we're good, we need to have this, because that will make us good. And that's an orphan mindset. That's how many orphans think. Like, they have to have this thing in order to be validated. We have to accomplish, we have to achieve, we have to hold, we have to grab on to these things, we have to get it. And then when we get it, then everything will be right. But it isn't, because we're still orphans inside. But we can't think past that. We just keep going and going and going and going forward and grabbing the next thing and grabbing the next thing and fighting and striving and fighting and striving, all in a vain attempt to acquire the thing that makes us feel whole when it's never there. But we can't see that because we've had to live in states where all we could do was try to prove that we were good enough. And it's never enough. I had God hit me the other day with this reality about honor. Oh, I hate it, but it's so important. About how I struggle to receive honor. And he highlighted, he literally told me, he was like, you have strived so much to be loved for all your life. And yet, whenever though they have tried to love you, you have not been able to receive it. And he showed me all these images of people when they've just poured out on me. And it broke me, but also, in all those instances, I broke down because I couldn't handle what happened. The thing about it is that, like, I use achievement as an example, but because it's personal. But there's so many more. Porn's a big one. There are so many people who self-soothe themselves with porn. That's like a safety blanket. It's like a dirty, icky, sticky safety blanket. And it's disgusting, and everybody feels it. Every Christian man and woman who gets into pornography feels how disgusting it is. But you don't stop. You keep going until you're numb about it, because it makes you feel something. There's some release that happens, and you don't feel as alone or as crappy or something. At least not for a moment. You get your 6 seconds or so, and then that's over, and you're just left with the nothingness. Drugs have a similar aspect. You're always trying to get that feeling, trying to numb that pain, trying to be free of that to not feel. Because at the end of the day, so much of an orphan's mindset is to not feel how bad they feel. They run and they strive and they grasp at things that will satisfy, that will distract from what their internal emotional state constantly is. You always feel alone, but you don't want to feel alone because being alone hurts. You always feel like nothing, but you don't want to feel like nothing because feeling like nothing hurts. You always feel desperate, abandoned, hopeless, broken. But you don't want to feel those things because they hurt. So anything's better. Anything is better than that. So you grab for it. even Jesus. I've known so many people in my time working in the church where they were glory seekers, we called them. They were people who they weren't there for any like deep revelation. They didn't really come to get close to God. They came to feel His presence. They came to receive, to be prophesied, to be prayed for, to have the experience. Because what they were there for, in reality, was to feel like they mattered enough to God that He would show up. They never changed. They didn't grow. They were always the same. Because what it was it was like a high that they were grabbing for. The high of being in His presence. And it's twisted, but we do the same thing with relationships where we'll grasp for people. We'll grasp for people to make us feel whole. We'll grab at relationships in the hopes that connection will make us feel whole. And some people will even have kids. They'll have babies. And they'll say this thing of like, I just wanted somebody who would love me. And then they perpetuate. Because they're already carrying orphan mindsets, and they'll perpetuate those orphan mindsets, and they'll create brand new orphans in their children. Because they're not having kids to love the kids, they're having kids so the kids will love them. They're doing it. It's selfish. It's just another attempt to grab and hold on to something that will make you feel anything but the pain. And the thing about it is that, like, a lot of that pain comes from envy. This might be like kind of a hot take, or maybe something that a lot of people don't put together. But there's pride. A lot of orphans also have a lot of pride. And that's where the justifications come in. I just have to pause and like kind of address that because it was, I think I meant to say it earlier, but pride is like is another coping mechanism, and it's a huge one. So many people with orphan mindsets use pride as kind of like a prop to hold up what they're doing. Like that push forward, that like thing where they're just grasping and fighting and striving, even when it's like made clear to them that this is not the right thing to be doing, they'll use pride will prop up their ability to do it. And some of them will use their history, their background, what they've never had. Some of them will use the fact that they're orphans to justify continuing to be orphans. It happens. I know, I've done it. I know I've done it. And the thing about it is that with pride, you know, it's so destructive. Because what it hides is we can acknowledge our pride. The funny thing about it is that for most of us, like recovering orphans, you know, we can see our pride, and we can acknowledge that, and we can go to God with that. But what we don't see is what's underneath it, and that's the envy and the entitlement that comes with that envy. Envy is, to give a definition that I'd recently heard and I felt it had to be included in this message. It was by one of the pastors from Upper Rooms. I can't remember his name. I think his last name is Tripp.
Jonathan something.
I'm wrong. Anyway, he gave this word about this, and he said that envy is the pain of not having what others have.
The pain of it, yeah.
And there is nothing more directly associated with an orphan mindset than looking at the world around you, seeing happiness, seeing people with loving parents, or loving siblings, or loving social groups, and thinking you should have it too. And then feeling that deep, deep, deep pain that comes from not. From knowing that you don't. And knowing that you need it. But it feels like you can never have it. So you fight and you strive to try to get it. And you struggle. And you struggle and you lose, but you keep trying because it's all you know how to do. Because you have no one else to back you up. It's all on you. And that's how you think. That's how we think. I have had a great many struggles with God over the years. In Heather's illness especially, where it's come down to this thing, this fight, this contention of I have to take care of her because you won't. And I've given a lot where I've been so offended and so angry at God, even though he told me what he was doing, even though he showed me he was there, I still could not get over the idea that he wasn't helping and I had to do it. I took it upon myself to take care of her in this way or that way because God didn't care enough.
And it felt
And yeah, felt like a failure when all of my work was meaningless. How many of us have gone through this where we've tried so hard and fought so hard to get this thing that we feel we need, that we want, and that others have, just to end up with nothing but sour grapes and more pain? Every single person who this message is resonating with has suffered that at some point. I know it. I think of the people in our group and I know it. All that effort, all that work, all that trial, all that everything poured out, all that energy expended. And you end up with empty hands and just feeling more alone again. Because we don't think about it. We don't have the ability to see it. Because we're so focused on how we've seen things before. Because it's all we've had. Nobody has an orphan mindset because they want it. Okay?
Yeah.
They have an orphan mindset. And just to pull away from this, I feel like we've beaten to death enough what this is. Now let's talk about what this is not and where we need to go. We don't want this. I don't know anybody who has an orphan mindset who wants it. I don't know anybody who wants to strive and fight. Anybody who's ever been nurtured. I feel like this is a thing that I need to highlight, is that for those who have felt nurtured, loved and nurtured, you know that there is a place where you can just exist. And that's enough. Which is a difficult thing for so many of us to grasp. I've been talking about this for years, about how there's a place for us to exist in the love of God and to know that we're good enough because of His love. But so many of us struggle with that. I myself struggle with that because I constantly feel this pull, like I need to do something to prove I'm good enough for Him. But He's saying to just sit and understand that I matter because I'm loved. That's enough. And it's like that doesn't compute. So I'll find myself still trying to go do things, trying to go save people in order to validate His love, to validate His approval and His that. And I can't just exist. I have to go. I have to move. I have to do things. But that's what happens when you've only got half of the picture of what love is supposed to look like. Or none of it at all. Because when you live, when you've existed, when you've been nurtured, you can know that it's okay to just sit. It's okay to stay. It's okay to just exist in this point, to just be. And there's a place and a time for that, and that's where you can receive. It's where you can grow. The funny thing about it is working out. For example, you can do all the working out in the world that you want, but you don't grow until you rest.
Yeah.
And that's something a lot of us don't get because we feel we need to hustle. So there's a place for us. If you recognize what I'm talking about, if what I've said has triggered you or offended you, I apologize for offending you. Again, it was not my intent. But at the same time, let's look at this, pause on it, address it. Because that's what we need. We need to have this addressed where God can speak into this situation. And that's the thing, is that some of us don't trust God. If we're going to be real about it, then let's be real about it. Some of us some of us are at odds with God, because some of us blame him for our state of orphanhood. It's easy. He's all powerful. Why do you let that happen? He's omnipresent. Did he watch all those things happen? Yeah. But why? Why'd he allow that? How can I trust somebody who would allow that? God allows so many things in this world because the world is not under his control entirely. I just got done talking about how demons will create mindsets in people, and then they'll just wind up and let them walk. And then they'll go and they'll have families, and then they'll share that mindset and teach their kids that mindset. So then you have generations of people carrying mindsets. It's not even that a demon is doing it or perpetuating it. It's that it was created by it, sure. It was started by it, sure. But it's now being carried by the people. And for the kids who grow up in that, they don't understand any other way. They want that. They want to live in that way because they don't know any other way. It's comfortable. It's all they know. And what comes down to is that so many times what God allows is for things to happen because that's the way the world is. We want this in some way or another. We don't see that we could do things a different way. We don't understand that there are better ways. We don't understand that there are his ways. And sometimes we even reject his ways. You know how I was just talking about the guy, the former gang member? I was quoting scripture. He was quoting gang life. He preferred his way because it's what he understood. It wasn't that he would take the two side by side and say, well, I'm going to choose the gang way. No. He rejected what I said because he couldn't understand it. And this is the struggle that God has with us so very, very often, is that he would create a world in his own image, but we have to partner with him. And a lot of us don't. The world as it stands is not in partnership with God. So he doesn't have control over those parts because he doesn't control those people. So you have parents and family members and churches and whole communities where they're twisted.
Yeah.
You have whole countries where they're twisted, and evil exists in their midst. And God isn't able to work as much. Even to go back to that first verse we started off with, what did it say that happened with Jesus after they all got offended at him and rejected him? For all of his power, he could only lay hands on a few sick people and heal them.
Wow.
That's Jesus.
Yeah.
He stopped storms. He raised the dead. We all forget these little stories where it shows limitation. It shows...
Due to free will.
Yes, it shows limitation due to free will. We omit those from our memories because we're focused on the big elaborate things. We're focused on him stopping storms and raising the dead, and we say, well, why didn't you do that in my life? And he's like, well, also there's this other one too, where everybody rejected me and I wasn't able to do much. We need to be able to see this whole thing, and when we have a preset mind function, or when our mind is on a preset, it's hard for us to move past that. But we need to. And therein lies our thing. God, again, he would partner with us and change the world. That's his goal. That's his yearning. His heart's desire is for us to be close to him and for us to walk together in order to move together, in order to go into constant deepening relationship where we're free of the lies of this world and the chains of it that bind us down to it, and receive a new way.
Yes.
But we have to be willing to partner with that. And that's hard when you've got an orphan mindset, because everything in you is saying you're alone and you have to handle this yourself. God wants to carry you. Okay, what do I do to be carried? Nothing. I can't do that. I have to do something. No, you don't. Yes, I do. No, you don't. Why do you think you do? Because I have to. That's not a valid answer. That's a feeling. An expression of a feeling that comes from deep damage. So there's a place to ask for healing of this damage.
Yes.
There's a place to ask for healing of this entitlement and envy.
Yes.
The thing about it is just to like round out the point about envy, is that we look at the world around us and we see others and what they have, and we wonder why we don't have it.
Yeah.
And the reasons we don't have it are many. I cannot speak to everyone's individual ones. I know for me it's because of how I was raised and because of the family I was involved with. They had false interpretations of God that they taught me, and I've struggled to get close to God at different times, and even after getting close to Him, there are times where we've run into walls because I couldn't see past my own mindsets, my own belief systems that were created by that situation in order to see the truth of His character. If you came to me and like told me that God had limitations 20 years ago, I would have spat in your face. And I don't mean as a joke, I mean literally. I would have spat in your face and told you how wrong you were and then trashed your family. Because that's who I was. But now, knowing the scriptures better, and I knew that verse at the time, I just would have missed that point. Because again, I was focused on the elaborate and the big. I wasn't focused on how Jesus fed 5,000 people, crossed a lake, and when they followed Him, He gave them a message, and they said, I don't receive that, and then they left Him. And he had 5,000 people who He performed a miracle for, only to have 5,000 people reject Him.
Wow.
I didn't see that. I didn't see that. Jesus knew what it was to be rejected,
Yes, He did. Yes.
what it was to be abandoned by those He loved.
Yes.
John 1 even states it. We'll read it real quick, just to, because I'm going to butcher it if I try to do it by memory. Let's see here. There it is. The true light, this is John 1, starting in verse 9. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through Him, the world did not recognize Him. He came to that which was His own, but His own did not receive Him. Some translations say it rejected Him. Because that's what happened. That's what happened. Jesus came to His own people. He came to the Jews even. Ministered to the Jews, and they were the ones who ordered His execution.
Yeah. The world hates God.
So He understands abandonment. He understands rejection. And there's a place for us to be able to attach to that, to talk to Him, to be close to Him, to learn from Him. because he can lead us out of this. These mindsets, these lies that we carry around and we believe. You know how many times I've known people who had orphan spirits? And I'm guilty of this myself, so just so we're clear, I'm preaching to the choir here. But so many times when I've known these people, and they had people around them supporting them, but they couldn't even see them. It's like they couldn't receive. They had people there who had their back, and they couldn't accept it. They were focused on other people that they wanted to have their back, or that they thought they were going to get something from. But they couldn't perceive, they couldn't appreciate the people who were right there with them, supporting them. And they felt so alone when that person they were going for rejected them. There's one person in particular who comes to mind, and I'm gonna out him a little bit. No names. I'll be nice. But he constantly I was his friend. I was his best friend. And for years and years and years, I watched him reach for these different people. Over and over and over again. He found this new friend who was just going to be like the best bro, and they were going to be so close. They connected so good, and they really got each other in these ways, and they were such good friends. And then that friend left for one reason or another. And he was just heartbroken every time, just shattered. And I find myself just sitting there like, why do you not see me right here being your best friend every single time?
Yes.
And it would happen. It was every year there was some new bro. There were a couple who lasted a little longer, but it was still a thing. And I remember that feeling of just feeling unseen and not understanding why. Not understanding why. I understand now. I get it now. But at the time, I couldn't see through my own orphanness to see the orphanness in front of me. And I'm sure that I've done the same. I know I've done the same to other people. I had people trying to come underneath and support me, and I was so focused on this group or this person or this whatever. And I failed to recognize those who were loving me at the time. That's what we do, unfortunately. And that's something that we need to change. We need to be free of. Jesus will do this. If I reference John 17, and that is Jesus praying to God on our behalf about what he yearns for, what he wants for a moment. We got to see God pouring out his heart and what he wanted for us.
Wow.
I want to just pause on that for a second. I know we're past an hour, but Jesus Christ said a prayer where he poured out his heart to God on our behalf with what he wanted us to receive, what he wanted for us. No prophets, no apostles, nobody in between. It is simply the documentation of Jesus' own prayer for us, his own desire for us, being expressed by him. By him. I think that John 17 is one of the most important chapters in the entire Bible. And I think that because it's the one time when we just get the purest, the absolute most pure representation of God's heart for us. And that, if we can grab it, if we can grasp that, that can be world changing. And especially for us orphans who need to know that he cares, who need to know that he loves us. Look at what he says of all of us. His heart is on display in that prayer. And that's essential.
Wow.
I'm not going to read it. This is for anybody listening. If you want that, go read it yourself. Go receive it yourself. Go sit with him. Ask him about it. Ask him to meet you. Read what he says. And then maybe from there we can start a forward motion of being free from the bonds, the chains of orphanhood. And we can get there. We can get there starting by existing in his love. And that's what I've got.